While I would welcome the opportunity at some later time to talk with you about the work that I've done in sub-Saharan Africa, especially in Uganda and northern Uganda in Acholi, that will not be the focus of tonight's presentation. Instead, the emphasis will be on the complicated journey with many twists and turns that led me to spend many years abroad, traveling, studying, and researching in Europe, particularly London and Oxford, in the UK, and especially in Africa, in Kenya, Ghana, South Africa, and predominantly Uganda. I've spent at least 34 of the 54 years between 1966, when I first went to Africa, and 2020, when COVID ended my last extended time there. So 34 out of 54 years, I was in Africa for at least part of those years. The twists and turns I mentioned a few moments ago occurred within very different contexts, with equally different hopes and understandings, and often long before I had any idea of what or how they were to contribute to sub-Saharan Africa becoming the major focus of my work and then my life. If anybody can't hear, raise your hands, okay? And I'll try and catch that. The earliest roots of this journey began in Benzie County, here in Benzie County, where my family moved in the summer of 1954 from a town in north central Ohio.
Ron.
How about this one? Okay. I'm sorry, I'm not used to speaking with this and holding this, so forgive me, please. So, came to Benzie County in 1954, just before entering the 4th grade. My 8th and 9th grades, 1958 to 60, were spent in Columbus, Ohio, and Minnetonka, Minnesota, west of Minneapolis, where we moved for my father to find work after difficult times. But he had always wanted to live in northern Michigan, where he had often come to visit relatives when he was a child. And he was not happy until we moved back. And we did in 1960, the summer before my sophomore year in high school. During that and my junior year, okay. Where's the clicker thing? Oh, you've got it. Okay. Okay, Matt's got the slide. Okay, that's a view of the home that where my family lived in northern Michigan on Route 669, Maple City Highway. And you can also see in that picture a train. One of the things that my dad did was built a model train that kids could ride in, that people could ride in. And he made a track that went all along 669 for about a quarter of a mile. And it was a real attraction. And it was a great place to be a kid. So we returned in 1960, the summer before my sophomore year. During that year and my junior year, I returned to the honor school district. Then in my senior year, the former honor and Benzonia districts were consolidated into the newly created Benzie Central district, more than doubling the size of my class my senior year. So more than twice as many kids in my class than there had been up to that point. Throughout school, I did well in my classes, with math my best subject. But classwork was not my major priority or passion. Sports were, especially in high school. I paid almost no attention growing up to politics, to world affairs, or history beyond the limited required high school coursework. And through my junior year, I even barely thought about college, beyond thinking that I would probably go to my small church college in Iowa. Being in the first graduating class at Benzie Central had many advantages. My classes were larger, with a larger range of courses, taught by a combination of former honor and Benzonia teachers. But what I liked most was what it meant for sports, as the consolidated school had better sports teams across the spectrum. Even more importantly for me was what it meant for my favorite sport of baseball, for it gave me and other honor athletes our first chance to play high school baseball. But during my junior year before consolidation, that was just in my senior year that we had a baseball team after we consolidated. But during my junior year before consolidation, I received an unexpected letter from Michigan State University informing me that I was one of 100 rising high school seniors from across the U.S. who had been accepted into a 6 to 8 week program, fully funded, over the summer in math and science. It was a total surprise, as I had not applied and did not even remember knowing anything about this program. My guess is that the person who made this opportunity possible for me was my chemistry teacher that junior year, Ron Gray, who many of you surely knew. He was an MSU grad in his first year of teaching my junior year. And again, as many of you know, he died 2 years ago. As noted earlier, at that point, I had not thought given much thought to college, but I was certainly excited to attend this high school summer program at one of the state's 2 major universities. My excitement was justified. It was a great 6 to 8 weeks with a wonderful group of fellow participants and a mostly good and effective teaching staff. I focused on math and quickly realized that nearly all the others in the math classes I took, who mostly came from much larger and better schools than mine, were considerably farther along in the subject of math than I was. Most had already had 1 or 2 years of calculus, which was not even offered at Honor High. But I could basically hold my own in the classes while learning a great deal from both the other students and the MSU teachers. But in terms of my future, much more important than any classes I took or learnings I experienced was what happened on the last day of the course. In a final meeting for all of us students, the director of the program made the surprise announcement that we did not have to apply to Michigan State University to go to university there. We had all been accepted. So, after having given almost no thought beforehand, I now knew where I was going to college. And although I could have had no idea at the time, this was a crucial preliminary opportunity that would eventually make possible my connection with the wider world, especially Africa. My idea of college at that point was that it would enable me to become a high school math teacher and coach. And the latter was even more important than the teaching part. Sports remained my greater priority. But just a few weeks before beginning my college freshman year at Michigan State, I came down with mono. Any of you remember mono? Yeah. It was running rampant among adolescents and young adults at the time, both in the US and beyond. It ended up causing me to begin my first term at Michigan State 2 weeks late. This created only a minor problem for my courses, but much more importantly for me at the time, it prevented me from attending the fall tryouts for the MSU JV baseball team. Overall, I did well in the 3 terms of classes that freshman year, focusing on math, well enough so that at the end of the year, I was accepted into MSU's highly selective honors college. But I hadn't really felt passionate about what I had been studying and learning, and I had begun to question whether math was what I should do. But finally, during the 3rd term of that year, I was able to attend the spring JV baseball tryout. Missing the fall tryouts was clearly a disadvantage, and I was one of the final 6 cut. And we were all the smallest in size of the group. When I returned for the first term of my sophomore year, I gave a further, if hesitant chance to math and took another course or 2. But 2 crucial aspects of my having been selected to the honors college at the end of the previous year channeled me in an entirely different direction. Again, okay, sorry. Channeled me in an entirely new direction. The first was abandoning any further study of math. Is that better? Okay, sorry. And the second, even more crucially, provided the direction that I would take for the remainder of my undergraduate and graduate study, and then my future career and life. 2 things about Honors College. First, Honors College students were expected to serve as tutors in their subject areas to work with other students who requested help. Early that fall semester, I was manning the phone for handling Honors College tutoring requests. A friendly sounding female student called, asking for help in calculus. After we ended the call, I decided that I would take on her request. But after several sessions, despite my numerous calculus classes as an MSU math major, I could not explain or otherwise help her understand and do calculus. So I decided for sure that I had better find another major and another career path than mathematics. The second consequence of Honors College membership that was important proved even more important. Being an Honors College student meant that you could take any course on offer that the professor would let you in. Whatever your major, your year, or whether or not you had the required background courses or met other course requirements. Any course that the professor would let you in, you could take. Not having any real sense of what I might want to study to replace math, I explored a smorgasbord of courses. Come on, get on there. A smorgasbord of courses. During possible courses for the second term of my sophomore year. Eventually, I ended up in classes in political geography, religious studies, English literature, sociology, and crucially, it turned out, a senior honors history seminar. I have no idea why the professor in that senior level class for history majors let me in. I had no background whatsoever. The overall focus of that course was discrimination and exploitation, both of which were explored in various ways and contexts in the seminar's readings and discussions. When it came time to select a final seminar paper topic, my choice was guided by a graduate student from the church I attended. He had been taking me to a range of public lectures throughout my time at MSU, which I would not have attended on my own. And one of them was by chance on South Africa. As a result, I became at least somewhat aware of how apartheid South Africa, this is in the 1960s, how apartheid South Africa would provide a powerful example of discrimination and exploitation that I could do research and write on. And it thus became my seminar research topic and the first history paper I ever wrote. In addition, during that term, I made the definite decision to transfer schools and had applied to and been accepted at Kalamazoo College. I don't remember of what other places I had considered, but in addition to it having a highly positive overall reputation, two other aspects of K College cemented it as my choice. First, and then the main factor, was that it was a small college, and I hoped that I might be able to play college baseball at K College. And second, the one feature of the K College academic program that especially intrigued me was its unique study abroad program, in which 90% of K College students went overseas for foreign study. I had no idea where I might want to go for such foreign study. Up to that point in time, I had only taken 2 trips outside the US, both to places in Canada just across the border from Michigan. So the opportunity to travel somewhere, almost anywhere, to stretch my wings so much farther than ever before was most intriguing. After transferring to Kalamazoo for the spring term of my sophomore year, I again signed up for a mix of courses, including another one in history, this time an introductory class on European history, and this is now at K College, this small college. The professor was excellent and helped me begin to effectively read, understand, and write history. I soon came to regard him as a mentor. And once again, by total chance, this professor, John Peterson, was not actually a European historian who usually taught Western Civ, but an Africanist. The odds of this happening in the small 3-man history department, they were all men, at Kalamazoo College were extremely small. That the odds almost were negligible that there would be an African historian there. But there he was. After that European history course with him, this professor, John Peterson, over the next year, I took every course from him that I could possibly take, every African history, and even some other courses. This not only solidified his mentor status, but led Africa to become my main geographical interest. And after being able only to practice with the baseball team the previous spring, the term that I came to Kalamazoo, because you had to wait out a year after you transferred, I was able to achieve my goal of playing college baseball my junior year as an infield starter throughout the season. There's from an alumni magazine that just happens to show that image of me playing for Kalamazoo. Also during that junior year when I played, and again by chance, Professor Peterson set up a second K College foreign study program in Africa, in Kenya, in East Africa. I applied for and was accepted into the college's first Kenyan student foreign study group, where I would go during the fall and winter terms of my senior year in 1966-67. Okay, so that map um, represents the four countries that are outlined in dark are the four countries where I've lived, studied, and or worked. Kenya was going to be the first. Right next to Kenya, the country that I've spent most time in Africa, is Uganda. Ghana is over on the west coast, and South Africa, of course, is at the southern tip of the continent. Those are the four countries that I've spent considerable time in, living, working, studying. Okay. Kenya slides. This first of the Kenya slides provides a view of the country's capital in the 1960s. And it was a far larger and more diverse city than in any I had spent any time in growing up. It was pretty overwhelming. And it had a big central business district, high buildings. Lots of it were very, very attractive. But, second slide, there was also this. There were slums all around the central city, massive slums of mostly extreme poverty. So it, again, and I'd never seen anything like this, of course, before in my life. A third slide shows the University of Nairobi that I attended. And the one student, white student sitting on the ground with the other two was another K College student who was in that same foreign study group and a friend of mine. Okay, the third slide was university. The fourth slide shows the view of a lion in Nairobi Game Park. So close to the city that you can see the Nairobi skyline in the background. I mean, here was this game park with wild African animals, including lions and leopards, elephants, rhino, within sight of the university. It was amazing. There were other bigger parks in Kenya, but I didn't have transportation. I didn't have very much money. So this was the only park I went to, but it was plenty exciting to do it. And see animals like this and other big African animals for the first time in my life in their natural habitat. And it even whetted my appetite for more, which could come in later years. And the final Kenya slide shows an image of Maasai land in eastern Kenya. The Maasai ethnic group in the late 1960s were predominantly pastoralist, growing no crops and relying primarily on milk from their cows, meat from their cattle or animals that they killed, wild animals, and grain and seeds that they collected. That was their diet. And the area had wild game, as you can see in that photograph. And these Maasai young men are carrying spears, both to protect themselves from dangerous wild animals and maybe to do some hunting if the chance arose. It was a poor, lightly populated area, but it was exciting to go there, and I did because I volunteered to work with a group of students helping build a school in the small sub-county district headquarters near the site that this picture was taken. Any questions so far? And yes. In Kenya, there are several languages, but the language of education and of educated people was English, because it had been a British colony. So the university was all in English, and if I went out like to this, I had to have an interpreter. Another student who knew both English and from this area. And there weren't very many students from this area in university. That was a rare thing to have a Maasai student. So I didn't really talk to Maasai very much. I just saw them and took some photos. Sorry? Not at this time, no. That came later, and it'll come up in some of the later places that I mention and discuss. But I don't know, not at this point. I don't, at least I don't remember it as such. It seemed a very safe and peaceful place. There may have been something that happened with an Egyptian or sort of some abducted Israelis, but I think that was in Uganda, I think. Never mind. Okay. While I was in Nairobi at university, I applied for graduate study in African history to the three major African studies centers in the US and chose Northwestern. I was accepted at all of them and chose Northwestern with a 3-year graduate fellowship. My path forward now had a clear and definite direction as well as a means to get there. So I was headed to Northwestern. But perhaps nothing makes the significance of this Kenya experience clearer than when the K College baseball coach wrote and asked me if I could come back from Nairobi and foreign study a few weeks early to go on the baseball spring trip down to Mississippi and Florida. I wrote back that I could not. I was not going to leave Kenya until I had to, and thus ended my baseball career in college. My first year of graduate study at Northwestern in 1967-68 further solidified Africa as the central focus of my future career and life. I learned a great deal, and my graduate advisor there, John Rowe, eventually became my second academic mentor after John Peterson at Kalamazoo College. And Professor Rowe's research concentration was Uganda, next to Kenya, which I focused on more and more in my own research and writing. But as I was finishing my spring term, and I had a 3-year fellowship, remember, my spring term, my first year in graduate school, I was informed by my draft board that my graduate school deferment would end that in June. So it was going to end with that third term. If I would not be able to continue this graduate summer, I would not finish all the requirements to receive a master's degree, and the year would have been effectively wasted. So I set up an appointment with the draft board up here in Benzonia to request a deferment extension over the summer, which they eventually granted. In addition, though, my desire to get to Africa, preferably Uganda, remained strong and was getting ever stronger. And the opportunity to do so then seemed to be the Peace Corps. When I met with the board, the draft board, I floated the idea of Peace Corps as a possible alternative government service to the military, an alternative to the military. I could tell that they had never heard such a request before and got a sense that they might well agree. And they did. When I contacted Peace Corps to try to find out what upcoming programs they had in Africa, particularly Uganda, I found that there were a number, but it wasn't possible to apply for specific Peace Corps programs. Then you just had to apply to Peace Corps and they would assign you to a program. But one of those was in Uganda, and it was a healthcare project to screen people in the eastern part of the country for an eye disease called trachoma. Trachoma. Has anyone heard of trachoma? Anyone know what it is, what it does? Okay. Um, Trachoma is a highly infectious infectious disease that causes lesions in the inner eyelid. So it's not actually an eye disease per se, it's a disease of the eyelid, the inner eyelid. In long-term and or especially serious cases, lesions that the disease causes in the inner eyelids can become numerous and deep, and when they scar over, what do? They contract the inside of the eyelid, the skin and the inside of the eyelid. And what does that do? It pulls the eyelids under. If that goes on long enough, the eyelashes can, first of all, it becomes extremely painful to have your eyelashes scratching the eye. I mean, and I met people like this and saw people and referred them to the doctor for surgery. It was painful. But also, if the scratching went on long enough, they would become blind. So it was a dangerous, and if it got serious enough, especially dangerous and painful disease. Moreover, this program for trachoma was for married couples. And I had married the summer before beginning graduate school, and my wife was it was only after her sophomore year. So it was actually a bit too young for both of us. But we tailored our Peace Corps application to highlight my previous East African experience. So that would be the one that they would select us for. And we were accepted into the Uganda Healthcare Project. I finished my MA degree over the summer of 1968. What time is it? Sorry. 7:30. Okay, I'm not going to get as far along as I thought I would. Accepted into this program. Finished my MA degree. Finished my MA degree, and entered the Peace Corps project in January, and began working with trachoma patients in Bugweri in January 1969. So again, there's Uganda right next to Kenya. We might want to end the eastern region. They might want to get some Bugweri pictures up next. All right. Bugweri was an agricultural place. The Bagweri, the people of there, were agriculturalists. And one of their main crops was bananas. There were huge banana plantations, both for sweet bananas like we have, and also bananas that they would cook. They would roast and cook, and even sometimes mash like mashed potatoes. Sorry? Plantains. Yeah, that's what they were called. Okay. And that was also a cash crop. And here's a Mugweri young man, taking the bananas into the nearest town, which was called Mbali, about 20 miles away. Then they could get some money. Okay. Again, we're not quite to Acholi yet. But that's indication we're going to get there quickly. The Trachoma project was a good one. There were 10 to 12 Peace Corps teams plus Ugandan counterparts. We gathered people together at local chiefs or local government officials, examined them, looked for signs of trachoma, provided them some meds, and if they had it seriously enough at the time, we would refer them to a doctor who was based in Mbali, the town 20 miles away, who would examine them and perform surgery or do whatever needed to be done to help them. and prevent blindness. We examined thousands of people, our teams, and identified and treated hundreds of trachoma-infected people, helping them to keep from going blind. It was a good project. And also while there, as a side of discussion, or side point, but not an unimportant, or not an unimportant one. In May 1969, less than 9 months after going to Bugweri, the doctor from the project came by the house and delivered a letter, because we only got our mail. We didn't have mail delivery. We only got our mail, especially international mail, through this doctor that we would either pick up when we went there and referred someone, or he would drop off when he came by. So he came by and dropped off a letter. It was the only letter my dad ever wrote to me. He also brought the news that my dad had died suddenly, less than a week before, after a broken leg wasn't set properly. It was rebroken, and a blood clot developed under that second cast and went to a lung and killed him at 61. So I got the first letter, and the letter that Dad wrote explained that injury. But of course, he had no idea what the ultimate effect would be. But that's how I found out what happened and why he died. In my spare time, and I'll start hustling this up now. Yeah, a couple more minutes. In my spare time, I began to work on Bugweri history. Okay, sorry. In my spare time, I'm sorry. In my spare time, I began to work on Bugweri history, collecting oral traditions on their pre-colonial history, which was what I was really interested in. And then, 6 months before the Peace Corps project was over, my former advisor from Northwestern came on his sabbatical. And he had worked in Buganda, in southern Uganda. And I met him there. He introduced me to the local university and history department. They found out I was doing this sort of part-time work on Bugweri history. And then the new chairman, who was setting up a program to do research in northern Uganda, because not much work had been done up there, after we met, he said, would I like to come and work in Acholi, in the western half of Acholi, because he was going to work in the eastern half. And I said, sure, but I don't see how I can. I've got 6 months left in Peace Corps, and if we leave Peace Corps, we lose our trip home, we lose all of our income, we lose the motorcycle that we had for transportation. I said, I don't see how I can do it. And he wrote a letter to John Rowe, my former Northwestern advisor who was there, who somehow, and asked him if he could help support me or find support for me to join the project. And somehow John convinced Northwestern to fund me for 18 months to do research on the promise that I would come back and become a PhD student there. So they funded me for 1.5 years when I wasn't even a student. I have no idea how that happened, but it's what enabled me to do the research that eventually became my dissertation and my PhD. Okay, quickly, I'll just mention some other places. Okay, sorry, one other thing. Oh, and I forgot that tusk. One of the other things I did in Uganda while I was doing that research was there was a Catholic boys' school just about 3 hours or 3 miles away from the girls' school where my wife taught. And I went by there periodically, and there was an outdoor basketball court. And every once in a while, I'd see the guys out there in the afternoon during game time. So at one point, I stopped and drove up, got out, walked over. Those guys had no idea how to play basketball. They didn't know about jump shooting. They didn't know about, they played it like football, soccer football. Half of them, and like girls basketball at the time, half of them stayed in the defensive end. The other half, they had no idea. And I asked if I could shoot around with them a little bit, and they saw that I could play basketball some. So after we did that for a while, I said, "Do you guys have a coach?" And they said, "No." I said, "Would you like one?" And they said, "Yes." And this was just after, I'll mention very briefly, and people can ask about it if you want. This is just after Idi Amin. Has anybody heard of Idi Amin? Okay. This was just after Idi Amin came to power. And it made a difference that he was in power. And he was extremely violent. He was especially destructive in Acholi because that had been the largest group in the army that he overthrew. It was very difficult. And he made it illegal to do research in Acholi. Now, I didn't not do research in Acholi, but I then had to be very careful. And I especially had to be careful because once I started to go back and do research after his men first came up, driving into town to get gas for the first research trip, and somebody rode his bicycle right out in front of the car, and I hit him. Smashed the windscreen. There was glass and blood all over, and the body lying on the side of the road. You drive on the left there. My research assistant and I jumped out, saw that he was still living, but he was totally unconscious and he was really hurt. You could tell. So we drove to the police station. Uh, and again, my car had this broken window, glass and blood all over. We drove to the police station, um, hoping that they could deal with my car, because if not, it was going to sit outside the station. And if soldiers ever came, they'd see what it looked like. Well, they didn't have any cars to take us away or to move it, any extra people. So soldiers did start coming by and seeing the car and coming in the police station and asking whose car it was. And they hid me in an office for 3 separate groups of Ugandan soldiers with their automatic weapons pulling in, some of them coming into the police station and asking, whose car is that? And the police kept saying, we don't know. Someone just dropped it off and went away. Well, finally, they convinced the third group to go because they heard from the hospital that the guy that I'd hit was having surgery in serious condition, and they should go and be with their friend. So when they left, some poor guy happened to walk in with a car, and the police said, you take this man where he needs to go. And so he took me to the garage where I had the car service. I left the keys, got a ride back to the school, the girls' school where we were teaching, where my wife was teaching, told the headmistress, and she said, you can't stay here. If they find out where you are and they come onto the school, and these were Idi Amin soldiers, and they beat and raped, and they were horrible. So I understood. Unfortunately, the headmaster of this school drove us 5 hours, 6 hours away, maybe longer, to the capital, where we stayed for 3 weeks. So it would all boil over, and Amin soldiers kind of had other things to do. So that was my first time in Acholi doing that research, and I did over 100 interviews, and had enough to write a dissertation. But I hadn't done my graduate program yet. So when that year and a half was over, then I had to go back to finish my PhD, which was 3 years. When that was finished, I had had hardly any time to write the PhD, and my fellowship ended, so I had to find a job. So the first job I found was at a school for autistic children in Evanston, where Northwestern was located. That was for a year or so. Then I got a job. Sorry? I'm so sorry. I can't get used to holding this. God, that's really bad. No, I don't even know where I was. Evan, yeah. Yeah, a job in Evanston, where Northwestern was located. After that 1 year job, I had a job in North Carolina, in Asheville, North Carolina, for about 2.5 years, working at the best program for autistic children and their families in the country. I don't know how I got those jobs either, but I did. Teacher's assistant in Evanston, and then this other program. And while doing the last of those, or the latter of those, I wrote my dissertation, basically by spending every night in the office at from 5 o'clock writing the dissertation, which I completed and was granted the PhD in 1978. Okay, after that, I went to Ghana for a couple of years to teach and do research. There's not going to be time for much. Kumasi is where I was. It's a center of a major kingdom, the largest kingdom in West Africa, in a rainforest. This is what made the country of Ghana. That's called Cape Coast Castle, and that was established by the Portuguese in the 16th century to trade gold and increasingly slaves that came often to the U.S. and other parts of America. Okay, again, a rainforest. That's what the environment looked like. Dense rainforest, and that's a scene of the capital Kumasi, where I lived, and that's a picture of the most powerful group in Asante, or in Ghana, was called the Asante, the largest kingdom in pre-colonial West Africa, and that was the king of Asante. And though he had no government position whatsoever, he was one of the most powerful people in the country. Okay. Shall I stop? Or shall I? Okay. Sorry for this is going so long. The other place, after I got back to South Carolina, I ended up spending more than half for 7 years between 1989 and 95 in South Africa. My then wife, you can see where South Africa is. My then wife was doing her PhD in educational administration. And I'd been to South Africa a couple of summers and met somebody who was at a university there, the first colored. South Africa then had categories of people, racial categories: white, colored, mixed race, Asian, mostly Indians and Pakistani origins, and blacks, Africans. Okay. So we went to do a project related to my wife's dissertation, which was to provide a program to help train black teachers, black in the general category of African, coloreds, Asians, in educational administration and leadership. There wasn't a program like it in South Africa when we went there. We established the first master's program in that topic, and some 40 students did that course, including a semester at South Carolina, a 2-year course, and thousands of people took the in-service course, literally thousands, to help them become school leaders as the school system changed from white-dominated to locally administered schools. So that's my other African experiences. And then since then, I've been going back to Uganda over and over and over again, again, more than half the time since I first went to Africa and Uganda. So, international citizen, perhaps. A citizen that is mostly involved with Africa, yes. Thank you.
All right. Do we have any questions?
Yes. I don't remember the story. Nope.
There, hold on.
Ron shared a story at one time. He was receiving mail, and the mailman brought the mail, and somehow, wait a minute, somehow I'm supposed to have a sweater with this delivery, and the mailman was wearing the sweater. From what I Ron told me this story.
So it has to be true then.
All right, any other questions?
Yes, Coach?
That you played Frankfurt High School. He can hear me. You can't? Anybody hear me? No? I'm going to speak into the mic. Like they said on BNZ. But this is the point. Just a few seconds left in the game, and Ron got fouled and shot 2 free throws, and those 2 free throws ultimately beat Frankfurt. Is that true?
Yes, it's true, and it did that with about 3 seconds left in the game.
Also, I assume that all your scholarships provided funding for you to be able to navigate your life. Because you moved around so much, it takes money in some cases. So the scholarships did most of your funding.
Yes, yes, fellowships and scholarships. And some of them have been very big ones. There was almost $1 million fellowship for the South Africa project to train Black school leaders.
Yeah.
And there was another $1 million project from USAID to help help with land issues in Acholi in northern Uganda, where people had been forced into camp by the Museveni regime, and land got just all confused, and their land was at great risk. So it was a big project to help people better maintain control of their communal land. They weren't individual owned, they were clan based, to help them determine the boundaries, establish the boundaries, legalize them so that their land would be protected. So that was one of the last projects that I was involved in. And it was outside, it was funding, yes. Yes.
Hey, Ron Atkinson? Ron Atkinson, can you hear me?
Sorry?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Ron?
Yes, I mean, again, it's a number of the big projects were, yes. Well, the projects themselves ended, but projects like this have also ended or are ending, yes.
Hey, Ron, we have a question here on Zoom. You did not really explain why, when you applied to the Peace Corps, you wished to go to Uganda rather than return to Kenya. Why was that?
Again, it was mostly because of my master's advisor, whose research was based in Uganda, and that became the focus of my research that master's year. So I was already studying Uganda, and I didn't know where, if I could go or where, but that's why Uganda. Does that help? Okay. Yes.
And I was wondering if she was a U.S. citizen or if I was just curious.
The one in South Africa?
Mhm.
Yeah, no, she was, she was a U.S.
I see.
Citizen who was doing her master's, her PhD degree in educational management and leadership. And I'd met this South African scholar, the first colored to get a PhD in physics on one of my earlier trips. And he was involved in a group that was working with Black teachers all over the country. And I invited him to campus. And they were doing this project to help teachers. The project they're focused on was laws had begun to change. And up to this point, the disparities between what whites earned for a job, even the same job, and what coloreds and Asians and Africans earned was great. There'd been a new law that created equal pay for equal work. But for school teachers, high school teachers, most white school teachers had gone through high school, got the high school diploma, and then gone to teacher training college. Most Black teachers of all sorts for primary school in particular, they didn't go on to secondary school because it cost money. And they just went to teacher training college. So they didn't have the same education and the same qualifications. So they were paid less, even though they were doing the same jobs. So this organization was helping teachers get their high school degrees and then could go on. And then our project worked with those for educational leadership, and those were all, all high school trained.
For anybody else ask any questions, Joe and Andy from K are here on Zoom. And the white boy sitting on the grass in front of the University of Nairobi Library misses you, and he hopes that you will get in touch.
That's Andy. Sue.
What year were you talking about the teacher training? What year was that?
In South Africa. Yeah, that was from, let me look at my notes, from 1979 to 85. Thank you.
I had a question about the MSU professor who let this young man who had no knowledge of history at all into his graduate class.
It
and
was just a senior class, not graduate.
senior class, and
Yes.
you had to do a paper on discrimination. Does he know what you have done in the world?
No, I'm sure he doesn't.
Are you in contact with him at all?
No. I mean, it was a one-off position, a one-off class. So no. And then I moved from Michigan State shortly after that. So no. Nice question, but a no is the response.
All righty, we're about out of time here. So let's give Ron another round of applause, please.